very much. I think if I talk about how I came into this field a little bit, it might explain a bit of my character. I've been a psychotherapist since I was a bubba, since I graduated back in the 1970s. And I've explored the experiential side of things very, very deeply. And I suppose my career was always involved in the edge of things, the emergence of new perspectives and people coming into being. So that's sort of my training. And when I was introduced to neurofeedback, I went, ho, ho, ho. Thank you very much. And it took a friend of mine who's a very smart man about 2 years to talk me into even really looking at this relatively new therapy. Because I thought I'd pretty much had the field covered. I was towards the end of my career, I thought, top of the mountain, I thought. Anyway, I hemmed and hawed, but I went and to humor him, I went to a training course. And I swear, I was never so blown out in my life. The newness of it, the new perspective of it, just changed my way of thinking. And what the real driver was, I suppose, in getting going, was I had a daughter with ADHD. Well, there's the connection. Most of us neurotherapists really come in on a needs basis. We want to do something about something very close to us, very personal. So off I went, and the last 15 years has been a discovery of how this all works, and I've had to catch up on neurology. It's unfolding right before us, how the brain works, how the mind works, how these systems work together, and what we can do to enter into it. So I suppose I've kept my edge of not being too conservative in my perspectives. I've kept my edge, but I'm just as stubborn as everybody else. And I realized how slow it was for me to pick up on a new idea. So none of us can escape the tendency towards a conservative or more shallow way of thinking. But we don't know that when we're there. We think we're at the top of the mountain. Well, it's been humbling for me, and I've been able to meet some of the most smart, intelligent, adventurous people that exist on this planet through this technology, and it's just opened my perspective to how humility is really the important place to be if you want to open to anything new. So that's a bit about me.
Okay, your I will call it therapy, your technology has been able to help people in so many different fields, and we as humans, we don't live compartmentalized lives. We actually are a whole, but we don't realize that there are aspects operating in the background that aren't helpful. So in the case, just picking the case of working with athletes at the Australian Institute of Sport, you've got clients there, and your job is to help them basically become that 100% focus in the moment, which is part and parcel of becoming a top athlete, right? They do all that physical training with their coaches, and you help them with their mind. And that seems to be the defining, factor between people who do very, very well under pressure and people who just fold. Can you just talk us through how neurofeedback does that?
Okay. If we look at the general thing of peak performance, that is doing the best you can with what you have, not being somebody else, but doing the best you can with what you have. There are many reasons why we repeat patterns or we miss the moments of change that we need to adapt to. Either we get frightened, we get angry, we get wishful thinking. Years ago when I was on the Channel 9 golf show, we did comedy skits about cheating or trying to hit the ball too far, and all of these sort of dramas that we do. They represent our lives, our inner beliefs. And when you're out on the golf course, for example, you're displaying yourself, no one else. Your desire to be Greg Norman, or your fantasy of this, or your stubborn, repetitive behaviors that you do. So you keep slicing the ball, you keep doing all of these things. Lay yourself out. You're Your soul is on the course with you. And once you get that idea that you are the game, and top athletes, top business people, top professionals in their fields all realize at some point they are the profession, they are the game, they are the business. That is them. And it's a direct reflection of how they see the world and how they react to things, things that shouldn't be, accidents that happen to us, or, torpedoes that hit our boat, What do we do then? It wasn't on the plan. So the ability to be flexible, the ability to be present, not be bound by fears or negative thinking, these are all trainable positions that we can learn to attain once we know where we are. Once we can get some kind of grounded experience, we can then move towards a brighter place, a more reflexive, more spontaneous place.
So you're talking about the brain, even though it sits in our heads and we think, brain, mind, it just does its thing. We, the conscious person, can have control and influence over the way our brains function.
Very much so. Once you get the information, now the brain itself is not self-aware. We are aware, but within a limited band. Our consciousness is not the whole of the mind, it's not the whole of the brain. It's an aspect. And we can extend that out by becoming self-aware. I'll give you a simpler example than the mind, which would be your heart rate. You can alter your heart rate with biofeedback. You can change the health of that pattern through training. You can change your skin temperature through biofeedback, through training. So once you get the information loop, you can train these things. Now, the brain is the same. We can train different aspects of it. Okay, you're not going to change your brain into somebody else's brain, but you can make it the best it can be. Now, there are certain genetic limitations and certain experiential limitations that we have that shape and form us, but they are not written in stone. Even the genetic variances, or towards depression, family history of alcoholism, or whatever, these are not chiseled in stone. They're variances, and we can train ourselves in different directions once we know what we need to do. And that's all of that information is housed in the electrical output of the brain. That is the brain doing its thing, And once we can manipulate that through operant conditioning of brain waves. Now that's a bit sciencey, I know, but the biofeedback side of it is what allows.
Kid with ADHD, how do you get somebody so young, first of all, to settle down, and then you're going to explain this to them and say, hey, actually, you can do this where you can quieten down aspects of your mind and you can learn to focus? Because I know the kids tend to fidget and short attention span, etc. So you're saying that with this neurofeedback, you can get somebody to just settle, focus, be still, and become self-aware. And they can do it by telling their brain to do it?
Exactly. The ADHD side of things and learning disorders, this is our most studied. We have the deepest science in this. And in my clinic, we see these kids come in. They're like little fireballs. They don't sit still. They can't, especially boys. Boys are much, but the girls can do it as well. They can't focus, and you think it's an attitude. You think they're not trying, or you think that it's they're being willful, or that. But the real science comes when you ask the question, why do they have to do what they're doing? That's when you start asking proper questions. For example, with the ADHD thing, with the hyperactivity, that is a paradoxical solution to a problem. And the problem is the frontal lobes are not engaged. They are not optimized. They're under-regulated. So there's slow wave activity occurring when they need to be in the waves we're in now, which is attentive, and it's quite a higher burning of glucose level of brain activity. Okay, so the kids are adjusting to this problem by having some odd manifestation, like being the class clown, which was myself, I think, as a kid, and being hyperactive or whatever. And in the inattention side of things, the paradox exists there too, because it's rarely that the kids are not paying attention. The fact is they're flooded with their attention circuits are flooded. They are not gating. They are not selecting what to attend to. Everything's coming in. What's Johnny doing back there? What's Mary doing there? Anything but what's on the board. So that they have this inability to control and focus. Now, this can happen in business as well. When you're trying to work through your business plan, you can be paying attention to all kinds of peripheral things and just going off the focus. And it's so easy to do, fussing around with details, making sure your stapler works, rather than forming the type of relationships you need to exceed to your current position and move to a better place in business. So the same with the ADD kids, the same with affective disorders. These can all affect your performance in business. These things just don't go away. If you have these conditions, you tend to adapt to them. So and it's rarely recognized in adulthood, but we can see it in children much more clearly. But we are those children. So if we grow up with an ADD type brain, that's going to be in your business behavior. And in fact, I know many top executives running around in Sydney doing very good business, and their ADD is get out. If they didn't have on their shoulder somebody controlling, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, they'd be right over the cliff. So they form a pattern where they're able to bring other talents in, a team, so that they can have the visions and the go for attitude, but they have somebody who's keeping them from doing silly things. So you see that a lot. Okay.